Hey, what's going on, guys? Before we start the video, I just wanted to say that this is going to be a two-part video. First half of this video is going to be before I painted and weathered this hilt, and the second part is going to be after I painted and weathered this hilt. I did this because I wanted to gain a little bit more perspective on how this was built. I actually wanted to work on this since this is considered to be one of the most accurate V2s that is on the market right now. I wanted to actually work on this before I give any final thoughts and opinions on it. So, with that being said, be sure to stick around to part 2 to see this thing all painted up, and enjoy the video. Hey, what's going on, everyone? Ryan again with rpkcustoms.com. I am back home in Michigan, so we're back in my office. No more filming in the van for a while. But I got my first commission in since I've been back, and I wanted to make a quick video to go over it. So this is the PPP or PPP Foundry Cast. And I've seen pictures of these popping up on Facebook, but this is the first time I've had the chance to check one out in person, and I think it's really cool. So, like I said, this is a foundry cast, which means this was not machined. This was actually made with molten aluminum and a mold. And I believe that PPP or PPP is the only person that is doing this or has done this. The client sent this over for me to kind of machine down and clean up and then paint and weather. So right now, as it sits, this clamp section right here is too fat for me to even get a clamp on. So I'm going to have to machine that down quite a bit. And I'm also going to have to machine the rings of the grenade section down quite a bit. Now, because this is a cast, this is very, very wonky. You can see, hopefully you can see the booster section. Not only is it oblong, so it's a little bit wider here than it is this way, it also tapers down a little bit. So I don't know if you guys can make that out, but the booster section actually tapers down. So I'm not going to be able to put this in my lathe from the booster section. There's no straight edge to clamp on. Even if I use a 4-jaw chuck, it's not going to clamp on this properly because of that taper. So I'm going to have to put it in my lathe from this end, and you can see these little dark areas here, hopefully. There's one there, there's one right there, and there's another one right there. And that's where they put this in their 3-jaw chuck, or their lathe, to clean up the clamp section a little bit. They still did not take it down enough to put a clamp on, but that's okay because I'm going to have to clean up the rings of the grenade section anyway. Now, there's a lot of imperfections in this, which is the nature of casting, right? Even with my resin sabers, I know this. There is a lot of like air bubbles, or not really air bubbles because this is molten aluminum, but you can see a lot of imperfections from the casting process. You can see there, you can see the casting line, hopefully going up the grenade section right there. Another good example is right here under the emitter. You can see there's a lot of casting imperfections. So I'm going to have to go through on the lathe. I'm going to have to clean this up quite a bit. I've been talking with the client, and the places that I cannot remachine and take those that bubbling out, I am going to try to fill with epoxy and kind of smooth it out, and that way I'll be able to paint over that and you won't be able to tell. If we look at reference photos of the V2, we don't see casting imperfections in it, and that is one reason why I believe the V2 was most likely machined. That and a couple other reasons. The V3 was obviously cast, and we can even see the example of that on this piece where the booster section actually tapers down. We can see that that is present on the V3, not so much on the V2. So I do think that they possibly cast the pommel of the V2 on the original prop, but I am not quite sold on the fact that the rest of the V2 was cast. I'll go over that more in probably part 2 or 3 of this. I'm going to make a couple parts after this is all machined and weathered, and I'll go more into why I think the V2 was probably machined. I've already made a video on that in the past. You can go check it out. I don't think I did a really good job explaining it because I didn't really know how to cut video back then, and I was basically showing everything on a tablet. So I'm going to try to redo that video and give a better explanation of why I think the V2 was probably machined. But this is a really cool cast. Even if the V2 was machined, this is really cool. All right, guys, welcome to part 2 of the PPP V2. So this is the hilt all painted up and weathered. You can see we used my stencils. I had to go through and adjust the size of the stencils a little bit and cut some new ones for this because this hilt is a little bit bigger all around than mine. So just for a side-by-side comparison, this is my Sorry, my phone just went off. If you guys know what ringtone that is, be sure to drop it down in the comments. If anybody says Kim Possible, it's an automatic block. All right. So this is my this is my prototype V2, and this is the PPP cast. And you can see they look fairly similar. I will try to throw a picture up. I took some pictures of these side by side. I will try to throw that up in the video. But this is the star of the show. This is the PPP cast. Again, all finished up. And I think this thing turned out pretty good. I have some thoughts now that I have worked on this. And like I said, this is supposed to be one of the more accurate, or one of the most accurate V2s on the market right now. So the reason that this is considered one of the most accurate V2s on the market is because this was cast. Like I said in the previous part of my video, this was a cast saber. It was not machined. Parts of it were machined just to clean it up, to ship it out, but the majority of this hilt, or the main parts of this hilt, were cast. I think the only thing that wasn't cast is the emitter nipple. I know that was machined because it just looks machined. So after working on this, do I think the V2 prop was machined or cast? I'm still leaning towards the V2 was machined. And I think I stated this in the first part of my video. The reason I think this was machined is because there's no real visible evidence from the reference photos that we can see that indicate that it was 100% cast. Every oddity and imperfection on the V2 that we can see, it's explainable through just machining, you know, like the rings in the grenade section, how it appears that they are uneven in some parts. That could be trick of the camera. It could have been that when they were machining this, they took this out of the lathe at some point and they decided that they weren't finished with it, so they put it back in. And if they did not get this lined up perfectly, it would have created a wobble in the machine, which would have made the rings a little bit thinner on one side and a little bit thicker on the other. Again, it's not 100% evidence to say that the V2 was actually machined instead of cast. I could be 100% wrong. The V2 may have been cast. I'm just saying that there's no solid evidence, solid physical evidence, to point to the fact that this was 100% cast, like we see on the V3. We see all kinds of evidence that the V3 was cast. You know, we see casting lines, we see imperfections in the cast, you know, little pop marks in the booster section. So we know that was cast. The V2, on the other hand, it just seems a little bit too clean. Another big reason of why I think the V2 is probably machined is if you are going to start from scratch making one of these, making a saber, something that looks like this, and you're working, the only thing you have to work off is the MK1. If you are making something like this from scratch, there, in my mind, I've gone over it again and again in my head, there is no reason of why they would cast something like this to begin with. You're going to be taking 10 more steps, 10 more harder steps, a lot more harder steps to get to this point than if you were to just throw a piece of aluminum in the machine and machine it out. The argument against that is, you know, maybe the people that were working on this, that were making this, maybe they didn't have any machining experience, so they thought it might be simpler to cast and then clean it up versus just machining. But, you know, to argue against that, if you didn't have any machining experience, you probably shouldn't be running a machine in the first place, and they probably wouldn't even know how to use the machine. So, you know, you can go back and forth on this all day long. It is what it is. I don't see any solid evidence that they cast the V2. But like I said, I could be wrong. Now that I've worked on this and I've kind of seen how the cast held up, there are imperfections that run all the way through the metal. So, for example, I don't know how well you guys can see this because everything is kind of small. You can see, especially up here in the emitter, you can see there are still pop marks and little, what I assume are kind of like bubbling. You know, if you were doing a resin cast, these would be considered micro bubbles. There's still imperfections in the actual aluminum itself that some of them ran very deep, and I had to actually fill with epoxy before I painted over them. So, you know, the fact that there are imperfections that run all the way through the metal, and it's not just surface level imperfections, something that you can take out with machining, and the fact that we don't see that on the V2 prop itself leads me to believe that the actual V2 prop was actually machined. I do believe that the one part on the V2 that was probably cast was the pommel, because the pommel cubes are a little bit cockeyed, and it is very, very difficult to index all of these cubes accurately and have them be spaced apart. You know, without an indexing machine and a CNC, which I don't believe they had back then. If they did, they probably had some kind of a manual indexing machine. But you can go back and you can watch, I believe it was Adam Savage made a video, and he was trying to make a hero lightsaber, and he put the pommel, sorry, my phone keeps going off. He put his pommel in his mill, and he tried to cut the pommel cubes, and he was not very successful, if you go back and watch that. And this is somebody that has years of machining experience and years of prop building experience. This is somebody that worked on the Phantom Menace back in the day. So this is an actual prop maker and somebody that has a ton of machining experience, and he had a hard time cutting these pommel cubes. Now, it does make sense of why they would cast the V3 if they already had the V2 machined. They could very simply go take this, make a sand mold out of it, and cast the V3, and then just, you know, kind of clean it up on a lathe, something like that. But to make one of these from scratch, I can't think or comprehend of why somebody would do that. And if you look back at the behind the scenes videos of the prop department, how they were building the props, they were rushed on time building all the props. And casting is going to take a lot more time than just machining. So that's another reason why I think that they would probably just machine this, or at least the main body. You know, they were tight on time. The casting is going to take 10 more steps, 10 more much harder steps than it is just to machine it. You're going to have to throw this in the lathe anyway to clean it up. There's no point in casting it. Just take the hardest part out of the equation and just machine it right from the beginning, and, you know, it would be much easier than casting, is the point I'm trying to make. But again, like I said, I have no evidence of this. I have no proof. It's just my opinion based on the reference photos and working on a hilt that was actually cast. So I think that'll about do it for this video. I will give you guys another shot. See if I can get this focused here. Now I did go through, I believe this was a Roman's clamp. I did go through and I added some, just some rust in there. I've taken apart a couple of vintage clamps, and there's always seems to be a little bit of rust buildup and discoloration right in there, just probably from years of being closed up with the clamp bar over it. So I tried to replicate some of the rust and grime that would be built up in there. I also added a little bit of rust and discoloration around the lever. And I did all of the, oops, wrong side. I did all of the clamp damage and rust spots that we can see in the reference photos. So overall, I mean, I still think this is a really, really cool replica. It's a really cool prop. The fact that somebody took the time out to actually cast this, which is not an easy thing to do, is impressive. And you know, I know these hilts are expensive. I think on his Etsy page they're around $1,600 just for the hilt, and that's unpainted, no clamp, no card, anything like that. It's just for the raw cast. So these are expensive, and the price of these reflect how difficult these are to make. It's not that easy to cast metal. I have a little bit of experience in casting resin, and I am going to be casting metal here soon. Nothing to do with lightsabers. It is a side project that I've been working on for a while, but I am going to start casting metal, and you know, it's not an easy task. Especially something this big. Something this big is going to take a lot of work, and the price, again, reflects that. So it's really cool that somebody took the time out to actually do this. You know, regardless if you believe that the V2 was cast or machined, this is still really cool. And I am thankful that Sam trusted me to go ahead and do the remachining and the weathering on this. I really appreciate the opportunity. Like I said in my last video, or the first part of this video, I've seen pictures of these and I always thought they were really cool, but this is the first time I've seen one and got to work on one in person. So I want to thank Sam for letting me tackle this commission. Hopefully you guys found this entertaining, somewhat educational. Again, I just want to reiterate that I don't know for a fact that the V2 was machined. It just appears to be machined from my eye, from a machinist perspective. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I will see you in the next one. Bye.